Today we're going to start learning about comparing fractions by comparing just some unit fractions. It's lesson 7-4, that's on activity book page 379. Now, today you're going to look at various fraction bars that are broken up into various unit fractions. You're going to get your chance to make your own bars in lesson 7-6 in a few days. But today we're going to look at this here. Now I've got a straight edge to help me out just so we can compare sizes a little bit easier here. But take a moment, you might want to pause the video, take a look in your activity book at the fraction bars that you see on the screen right now, and see if you can see any patterns to these fraction bars here. Okay, well, all of these fraction bars are the same length. So in other words, the 1/1 fraction, 1/1, that fraction bar is the same size as the fraction bar that's broken into two different halves, which is the same as the entire fraction bar that's broken into 1, 2, 3, 1/3. So when you look at these, what do you notice? One thing I think that's probably pretty evident is that the larger the denominator of the unit fraction, the smaller the fraction actually is. So here we have a denominator of 1, and that's the entire fraction bar. Here we have 1/2, a denominator of 2, and that's broken into two smaller pieces than the 1 whole. Going down, you see 1/3, the denominator 3. It's broken into 3 smaller pieces than the halves. So the bigger the denominator gets, the smaller the actual unit fraction is. You can see 1/3, here, this is why I have my straight edge here. 1/3 is this big, 1/4 gets a little bit smaller down here. Then 1/5 is even smaller than that. 1/6 gets smaller than that. 1/7 gets even smaller. Finally, the bottom fraction bar, the smallest fraction on this particular page, is 1/8. So the larger the denominator of the unit fraction, the smaller the fraction actually is, the smaller its value. Now, that seems counterintuitive, opposite of what we might think, because when we think large, well, we think large, right? 2 is not a very big number, but 3 is bigger than that, yet the unit fraction is smaller. 4 gets even bigger than that, yet the unit fraction gets even smaller, all the way down to 1/8 here, where we have an 8. Well, that's the biggest denominator on the page, yet it's the smallest unit fraction. So again, it seems opposite of the way we might think of numbers. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the unit fraction. But I want you to pause the video for a second and think about why that might be the case. When we talk about denominators, we remember that the denominator represents the whole amount of the fraction bar. So if we cut a hole into 2 pieces, such as 1/2 up here broken into 2 pieces, those pieces are going to be bigger than if we cut the same size fraction bar into a total of 8 pieces. So the fraction bar cut into 2, those 2 pieces are much bigger than the same size fraction bar that has to be cut into 8 equal pieces. So that's why the denominator, as it gets bigger, the fraction gets smaller, because more and more pieces have to fit into the same size fraction bar. More and more unit fractions make up that same size fraction bar. So one pattern that you see, I'll start the sentence here, and I'd like you to finish it. The larger the denominator of the unit fraction. Sorry about the messiness, it's sort of hard to hold a phone and write on the page at the same time, making sure it's all on screen. The larger the denominator of the unit fraction, the blank, fraction. Pause the video, fill in the blank. The smaller the unit fraction. Go ahead and try to see another pattern that you've found in here. I'm going to move down here to comparing these basic unit fractions here. I'm going to do number 3 with you. Now in lesson 7-5, you're going to use some circles. So the next lesson that you do, you're going to use circles and cut them out and see this here. But remember, based on this information, can you do number 3? Thus, the larger the denominator of the unit fraction, the smaller the fraction. Well, that would tell me that since 3 is larger than 2, the 1/3 rather, is the smaller unit fraction. Now, when you look at it, again, you're going to do this in the next lesson, but I want to show you how this would make sense. We have 2 circles that are the same size. If I take 1/3 of one of the circles and shade it in, so I've shaded in the 1/3 unit fraction on that circle, shade in one piece out of 2, 1/2 of this, it's pretty easy to see that 2 circles the same size, when you take 1/2 of one of them, that's a much bigger amount than 1/3 of another one. Turning the page here. So now we are on page 380, comparing unit fractions with number lines. Now remember that number lines and fraction bars on the previous page, they're different ways of showing a very, very similar concept. So here we have a number line that goes from 0 to 1. The various fractions from the previous page, or at least some of them, are plotted on this particular number line. Number 5 tells us, describe a pattern that you see in the number line. So to respond to this prompt, what do you see here? Pause the video and think about it, and compare what you saw on the previous page with what you see in this number line. One thing that you see is that 1/8 is the first fraction. It's the smaller amount. It's the smallest amount on this particular number line, whereas the biggest fraction is 1/2. So again, you can see on a number line that the greatest fraction has the what denominator? Pause the video, fill in the blank. The greatest fraction has the smallest denominator. So use that concept here, thinking the bigger the denominator of the unit fraction, the smaller the actual fraction is. Good luck, boys and girls.